So I've downloaded the pictures, the food pictures that we're working on, and also the Glencara EPS folder. The first one we're going to do is make a Photoshop clipping mask. So I'm going to fire up Photoshop, and this works in all versions of Photoshop. This is really nothing new. And we're going to make a new document. Go into File and New. The size needs to be 10 inches by 2 inches. So we're going to change this to inches. Make that 10 inches wide, 2 inches tall. And just for this, I'm going to make the resolution 300. What's a good printing resolution? 300. Higher the resolution, the better print that you get. So that's why I'm setting it to that. What's a good screen resolution for a computer screen? No, it'd be lower than 300. About 72 to 100 is a good screen resolution. Okay, so I've got my new thing that I've created. I'm going to be working in my layers palette, so I need to make sure my layers is opened up. The next thing I need to do is open up the vector file in Illustrator. So go here, Glencara, it's an EPS. Hopefully if I double click it, there it goes. It'll open up Adobe Illustrator, and we're going to copy and paste it from Illustrator into Photoshop. Okay. So here's our logo that we're working with, and remember, a vector file is one where you can see all of the points, and you can actually move these around if you needed to make a change. You can select individual anchor points and be able to change them up. We don't want to be able to do that, so I'm going to zoom out and just select it, copy, Command-C. We're going to go back into Photoshop, and then Command-V to paste it. Now when I paste a vector object into Photoshop, it's going to ask you how do you want it to be pasted as. Remember, Photoshop is raster, it deals with pixels, whereas Illustrator deals with points, it deals with vectors. What we want to do is paste the pixels into what we're working with. So you're going to choose pixels and say OK. And it's going to ask you, it's going to give you the ability to resize your image once you're working with. You can make it larger or smaller. Just make sure that it's proportional, holding down Shift. So I'm just going to make it pretty big so we can see what we're working with. As soon as I get it the size that I like, I can hit the check mark at the top, or I can even hit Return. And now you see that we've got Glencara on one layer, and we've got our white background on another layer. Next thing we need to do is to create a fill layer within Photoshop. Fill layer allows you to fill in either a pattern or a color or a gradient into an entire layer. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. Here's the professional way of doing it. Go to Layer, and there's New Fill Layer. Notice that there's 3 different types that we can choose from. A solid color is just as it sounds, one solid color to use from. A gradient will fill in as a gradient. So this is the one that we want to choose. With it chosen, it's going to ask you to give it a name. We're just going to call it Fill Gradient 1. We'll say OK. And now you can see this is what the layer looks like. I'll even expand it out so we can see it. So here's this gradient, and here's also a little layer mask that it's working on. This is the main thing. By default, here's our gradient. It goes from white to black. And in this menu is where we can make our adjustments. Notice it's actually going from black to transparent. So if you wanted to change this, you can click here. Here's some predefined ones. Here's our red to green. So now it's going from, red to green. I can change the style. A linear one goes from one end to the other in a line. Radial one goes from the center point outward. Angle, each one of these has something a little bit different. Reflected, diamond. Here's another fun thing. let's say I wanted to move it around. So let's say I had this angle one. And I didn't want it to be in the center. I can click here and move it to be at a particular point. So if I wanted it radiating around this way angularly, I can do it that way. I can even adjust the angle at which it's starting. This is especially important if you have a reflected one, something like this, and I want it to be at a different angle and moved around. And of course you can adjust the scale of it, how big or small you want it to be. All of this is found by double clicking this little icon once it's set up. What colors do I need this to be? What am I asking for you in the exercise project?
Green to yellow.
Green to yellow. So I need to change this red to yellow. I'm going to click on this. It's going to pick up or pull up my picker. And down here at the bottom allows me to choose whatever color I want. I can double click on this one. And let's just choose yellow to work with. So there we have it. Yellow to green. We'll say OK. I'll do a simple linear one. And let's change the back to 90 degrees from there. We'll say OK to that.
Is there a way to make more than 2 colors?
There is, yeah, great question. So I'll click on this again, double click. That'll bring up my option. If you want to add more colors to it, simply click along this bottom edge and that'll add another swatch to it. And you can move this around, so if you want it to start or stop at a particular point, then you just double click it to change up whatever color you want it to be. When you say OK, it'll do that. To get rid of it, you can click and drag it off and it completely removes it. So that's how you can add and remove things from there. Great question. Say OK to both of those. Alright, so you see how we've got it set up. I've got my gradient fill on top, I've got my logo in the middle, and I've got my background, which is white. What I want to be able to do is to make the black letters have this gradient fill. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to set up a what's called a gradient, or excuse me, a clipping mask for this logo. So I'm going to choose this layer, go back up to Layer, and then choose Create Clipping Mask. And this is the way it looks from here. Pretty cool? So I've got my green gradient going on from here. Let's look at our layers and see what's looking like from here. Notice what's different. It's got a little arrow pointing down to this one. This means that whatever is on this layer, whatever pixels are only showing up for these pixels on top of here. So I can actually move. I'm going to choose layer 1. Make sure I have auto select turned off. I can move this around and you can see it's only moving that particular layer. Same way I can choose my gradient and move the gradient around. Well, I'd have to double click it. And it's only going to move that particular layer. A clipping mask allows you to clip whatever is on one layer and mask it out on the layers above. Does this make sense? It's pretty cool. Here's another thing you can do with it. Let's say I went online and I didn't want just a gradient. I wanted, let's say, an Irish meadow. Good old Irish meadow. Yeah, just like my homeland right there. Let's say I wanted that picture to be incorporated into it. So I'm going to download it. Yep, there's my image. I'm just going to drag it into Photoshop. Drag this image into here as well. Notice now what I've got. See how when I drug it on top of there, there's the arrow clipping to that? So now that picture is only being clipped inside of that layer. And I can scale it and move it around to be whatever it needs to be to fill up that entire thing. So this is a great way of adding pictures to a thing. Just make sure that the text is on the bottom and the picture or gradient is on top. Now if I wanted to remove this, let's say I didn't want that to be clipped to it. I've got the layer selected. You can go back up to Layer, and release the clipping mask. And that'll turn it back into just a normal picture layer, and you can see there it is right there without it. Any questions so far on how to do that? So that's a clipping mask. Yeah, question.
Layer one has to be pixel.
Yes, it has to be pixels. Yes. Great question. So layer 1.
When you choose the pixel, is it going to be that transparent?
Yes.
How'd you get that second layer?
The second layer, remember I pasted the vector file into here. And
It
so,
automatically did the transparency.
yep, because we chose pixels, everywhere there wasn't vector, it turned it into pixels.
And then you just chose clipping mask to make the video.
Yep, chose clipping mask on this layer to make that. Here's another kind of a quick tip. If you want to quickly make a clipping mask, hold down your Option key. Option key is found next to the Command key on your spacebar. And then when you move in between the two layers, see how it changes the icon? If I click now, that also makes a clipping mask quickly from there. Hold on Option again, it'll unclip it and unclip those two. So that's one thing you can add to your design is a clipping mask. How are you going to do that for your design? What are some ideas that come to mind for yours? Hold down Option, click, automatically I've got it. That is another kind of great question you picked up on. Let's say I painted something inside this layer 1. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool, make it a little bit smaller, and I started painting. Even if I chose a different color, let's say I chose red. And remember, I'm in this, logo layer. If I start painting, I'm not painting red. I'm actually painting whatever mask is on there. So wherever the pixels are, that's where it'll be from there. You can see inside of here it's red. Well, it's actually just masking it out from there.
How'd you make the brush smaller so fast?
On the keyboard shortcut, the open and close bracket keys
Okay.
will allow you to change the size of it on the fly. Great question.
So the clipping mask only work on 8 pixels.
Yes, only on pixels, yes. Now there was a way of doing it in Illustrator. We're not going to do it for this particular project, but only in Photoshop. Only the pixels is where it works from there. Okay, so that's the first part of the exercise. The second part is how to do a clipping path inside of InDesign, and we're actually going to use Photoshop to do this one. When you save this, just be sure to save it as a Photoshop file, and that'll save all the layers that you're working on. Second thing, and we'll close this all out.
How'd you get the image trace or the dots all over
The logo,
the, yeah.
when I opened it up, I just selected it. It automatically shows the outlines of it.
I mean, because like sometimes when I go to text and then I type in like a certain font.
But this isn't text. This is just a picture. Good question. If I did type it out, you're right. Text is treated differently. Text has a baseline, and those are editable characters. These are not editable. These are actual pictures, actual objects that are drawn off. And so that's already done for you, so you won't have to worry about typing out anything.
So you'd have to save the text as a picture and then...
Yes, yeah. The second one is making a clipping path for InDesign, and we're going to use some of these pictures to do that. So I'm going to go back into Photoshop. We'll start in Photoshop and make a tabloid-sized document. So here's a preset size under US paper. There's tabloid. Notice that's 11 by 17. We'll say OK to that. Next thing you're going to do is open up 5 of the food pictures, any 5 that you want it to be. So I'm going to, let's choose these first 5. Drag them in there. We'll do it quick and dirty. 4 or 5. Uh-oh, don't want that one. Go away. That's the one we want. Now I'm using my Move tool to drag this one into here. Drag this one into here. Notice they're super duper small. That's okay for what we're doing. And once they're in here, I'm just going to scale them up so we can see them and kind of place them about. There's that boxty. Okay. So I've got 5 different food items. If you look in our layers, you can see each one is on its own separate layer. Doesn't matter where they're placed, just kind of have them have them placed as they're working with. The next thing you need to do is open up your paths palette. And that's usually located right next to your layers. So I'm going to drag this one off over here so we can see it we're working with. The paths palette allows you to make a vector path inside of Photoshop. Now it does work a little different from Illustrator, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible. The first thing you can do is make a new path. So inside paths, down at the very bottom, here's a new path picture. So there it is, path 1. Right now I don't have anything inside of it. The tools we're going to use are towards the bottom of your image. Notice there's your pen tool, it's free draw. Here's a path selection tool. Notice you even have the white arrow direct selection. And there's also some predefined shapes that we're working with. For this exercise, just use the polygon and the custom shape. I'm going to use a polygon first. With it selected, there are some things to pay attention to at the very top. First of all, there's different types of paths you can create. You can do a shape, a path, or a pixel. Let me show you what each one is a little bit different. If I choose shape, I'm just going to show you what it does. I'm going to draw, just by clicking and dragging, a regular shape that I'm working with. Notice that it fills in whatever fill color I had. In that case I had red. And it has its own little polygon layer that you're working with. In addition to this, you can see here at the bottom, it has its own path that it works on. So there's polygon shape path 1. There's the thing that I created. What's fun about this is you can use your path selection tools to move these around. So with this one I can click on that, and just like in Illustrator you can change up the paths. Same thing in Photoshop. It automatically does it. You can always go back to this and make the change. And that's the first option. Oops, excuse me, let's choose my polygon again. That's the first option of shape. I'm going to choose the last option of pixel. For pixel, if I go to make a polygon, first of all, it's saying, oh, I can't do that. This is going to be rasterized. What I need to do is, I'm going to hit cancel, is to choose just a regular layer, in this case layer 5, or I can make a new layer. Now when I click and drag and make a polygon, it's still there, it's still filled in, but look at layer 5. What did it do? It's part of that layer. It's not its own layer, it actually drew pixels onto layer 5. Additionally, there's no path to work in. So if I chose my tools, I can't click and make edits to this path. It's giving me an error saying there's nothing to choose on. Making a shape literally changes the pixels that are on here. It's drawing in that shape. So I'm going to back up, get rid of both of these. Actually, I'll just delete this away. What I want you to choose when you choose this path, or the shape maker, is path. And with it selected, you can change the number of sides that you have. What's a 5-sided polygon? What's that called? Pentagon. With this one, we've got our new path created and selected. I want you to make a path on top of the picture. So I'll make one on top of this one. We'll click and drag, hold down my space bar to move it around, and just click and drag over it. When I let go, I know it's difficult to see, but notice that it didn't fill in anything. It just created a path for now. If I go over to my paths palette, notice there's path 1 that's been selected. It's not going to fill in any of the pixels, it's only going to save the path itself. I want you to give this a name by double-clicking on it. And so we can call this shape 1 or food item 1, just something that you know the differences between each of the two of them. When I hit return, there's shape 1 already saved. If I have that path selected, the shape will be visible. If I don't have it, notice that the shape isn't visible. So you're going to do the same thing. Make a shape for each one of these items. The other one to use is the custom shape tool. This is a really fun one. Rather than just doing lines and circles, same thing, I've got path selected. You can choose some custom pre-made shapes that are already in Photoshop, such as arrows or little flowers. You can make your own in Illustrator and be able to paste them into here, or you can add some on later. Let's do one for a heart. So So I've got the heart chosen, I've got path chosen, and then I'm going to go on top of this one, click and drag. Now I didn't do something. Notice that I didn't make a new shape layer, so now my heart is actually inside of both of those. I don't want that, so I'm going to undo. First thing you got to do is make a new path. So there's path 1. Now let's make it. Click and drag. Now the heart is on there. We'll rename it shape 2. Next one, make a new path. What's another shape? Which one do y'all like?
Scissors.
Scissors. There they are. So let's do the scissors. We'll do this one on top of this one here. This is all going to make sense in just a minute. There's the scissors path, and there's the path number 1 here. We'll call that shape 3. So what you're going to do is make a path on top of each one of these objects. Okay? You're going to have 5 total. I'm just going to stop at 3 for now. Next, we're going to save this in a format that Illustrator recognizes. So by going to File and Save As, and the format we want to use, I'm just going to call this food shapes. You can call it whatever you want. The format we want to use is called the TIFF format. Usually down here towards the bottom. There it is. TIFF is a very professional format to use with printers. It saves layers, it saves paths, and it doesn't compress your image. So you're not going to lose any information. And it's usable for a lot of software. So with TIFF selected, food shapes TIFF, and I'll save it to the desktop. We'll hit save. It's going to ask for some options. For everything, we're just going to say OK. And say OK to that. So now I've got this saved as a TIFF file. And I'll close it out. Everybody follow me for that first part? Real simple. Now let's fire up InDesign. InDesign is what you're going to want to build most of your projects in, especially if they have a lot of text. So the menu should be built in InDesign because the menu has a lot of text to it. Would you build the poster in InDesign? Or maybe just in Photoshop? Why Photoshop?
Small image.
More images, exactly. It's a little bit simpler. But in InDesign, you can also do this as well. Let's make a new document. In this case, I'm just going to keep it as a letter size. We'll say OK. And now I'm going to load in these food shapes that I had saved. Okay, so here we are. Choose your rectangle, frame tool. I'm going to make just a small rectangle frame. And how do I drop in an image?
Command D.
Command D, good. Command D to drop it in. Choose food shapes. We'll say OK. Now by default, notice I've got it a little bit small. If I choose the center of it, I need to be able to move this around to see it. So I could make this box just a little bit bigger, but I only want to see one image at a time. Additionally, I want to be able to crop my image to whatever shape that I had created. So here's how to open up the clipping path for this particular image. I've got the image selected. Go to Object. There's Clipping Path. And then choose Options. And these are the options that will come up. First of all, by default, there is no clipping path. I'm going to turn Preview on. If I choose Photoshop Path, I can then choose the type of path that I have selected. Notice what I got there. There's my Pentagon. Here's the different paths to choose from. There's shape 1, 2, and 3. So now, since shape 1 was placed right over there, I've got it saved. If I had shape 2, how come I don't see anything for shape 2? Where's shape 2? It is up here on the top, so I can move it. Oops. Oh, come on. Need to move it down, so there it is, so I can see it. Because I chose shape 2 for my clipping path from that one. I can then scale this up to fit inside of my box. The best thing about this is if I have something with some text, I'm going to quickly flow some text into here. Go into Layout, Type. Let's fill it with placeholder text. And I'll send it backwards. Let's say I wanted my text to flow around this? Well, if I open up my runaround or my text wrapping, let's see. Where is text wrap? There it is, text wrap right there. So if I turn my text wrap on, I can actually wrap it around a particular image. Let's see if it decides to work. Oop, nope, we need this one to be selected. So either around the box or around the object shape, in this case, the shape of the heart that I'm working on. Pretty cool? So those are two different types of text wrap to put around your images that you're working on. One is either a clipping mask inside of Photoshop, or in this case, a clipping path inside of InDesign. What I want you to do is exactly what I did for this one. This is going to be your exercises. When you're finished with this one, I want you to save the TIFF file and also the InDesign file. And if you go to the Moodle page, I've got two different places to upload these exercises. This one's for the Photoshop clipping mask, and then we'll get to the Celtic knot a little bit later. Any questions on these exercises? Okay? Y'all can spend the rest of the time for today working on these and also doing the sketches for your first project.